Great. Thank you, Dr. B. Really inspiring. As Mark Kramer and Latondra Newton from Toyota join me here on the stage for their chat, I would direct your attention to the poll question we have. We have two final conversations here, one with Latondra and one with Jeff Hollander and Dan Hendricks coming up in a minute. And so this third question is asking about the state of leadership, engagement, and endorsement in shared value in your organization. So without further ado, Mark.
Thank you, Justin. Wow, is that a tough act to follow? But how inspiring. Yeah. Well, I'm really delighted to have a chance to talk with Latondra Newton from Toyota. This is billed as a fireside chat. I don't actually know where the fire is, but we'll try and create that ambiance if we can. Latondra has a 25-year career at a range of positions at Toyota. She is now the first Chief Social Innovation Officer, where she leads Toyota's work on diversity and inclusion, what they have chosen to call shared impact, but we know better, right? Shared value, and environmental sustainability, all brought together in one function. And then globally, Latondra also has the responsibility of overseeing the Toyota Mobility Foundation, which is a newly created foundation that is working to solve problems of mobility both for social and business benefit. And I have to say, FSG has had the pleasure of working with Latondra and Toyota and her team for a while now, and it has been a wonderful and inspiring relationship. So first of all, Latondra, thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
And you've had a tremendous range of roles at Toyota, and you've recently taken on this Chief Social Innovation Officer role. What is it that has given you the sense that Toyota is ready to begin this journey, ready for someone in this role?
You know, I feel very fortunate to have worked for my company because we kind of had a head start on this shared value path, even though we didn't know it 100 years ago. And I always jump back to tell this story because a lot of people don't realize that Toyota was not founded as a company to make automobiles. We actually made looms first. And what happened was the great-grandfather of Akio Toyota, who's now our CEO, Sakichi Toyota, he saw his mother, who was a fabric weaver, and that was sort of their form of industrialization in that day. But she would stay up late nights weaving fabrics, and the problem was that, you know, if you missed a thread, but you're manually weaving fabrics, you don't often know that the thread is broken until many, many rows later when the pattern is off. And so then you'd have to unwind all of the work you did and spend hours and hours recuperating from that. And he realized it was a social issue that these women were spending so much time away from their families or throughout the night and not getting rest and not taking care of themselves. And he wanted to make a change. So that started him thinking about how can you create a loom that's automatic, that when the thread breaks, it actually stops. And that was actually the origin of the Toyota production system, which is another story. But the idea was that he had this heart and mind to actually change and make improvements to society through doing something that could be marketed and sold. And so that was sort of our first foray into this kind of idea of you can do both social benefit as well as business benefit at the same time. And it wasn't for many years after that actually we got into the automobile business, but it was not about how to make money. It was actually about how to bring freedom of mobility to society in a way that could be sustained. And so that's really the origin. So that's one reason why I knew that this notion of shared value can take hold, you know, within the organization. But the second thing is how do we make it more relevant today? And that is, there is no bigger time than probably any time in our history, in the automobile industry history, that we've seen this kind of disruption that's going on and this kind of change in the business. You see a lot of entrants into the market, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. You see people experimenting with autonomous vehicles. We've talked about how artificial intelligence is going to change the way people get around. and the safety of that. And, and so there's so many things going on in the market that's actually making us think about our business going forward. And so at a time like this, when our business is already being disrupted, and when we actually have to think differently about our approach to doing work and what's going to be the sustainable models that we can create for the future, it makes us very ripe and open to ideas like shared value.
That's great. And I encourage you, I have more questions, but I encourage you to use the Pigeonhole technology if you do have questions for Latondra. But let me just ask, what are some more recent examples that have been inspirations for this shared value journey?
Sure. I'll start by talking about just a couple of things because most people know about these examples. So most people know about the Prius.
Sure.
Even though it's not very recent, it's recent enough. It's not something that we thought about as shared value. It was the idea of the chief engineer was tasked to create a 21st century vehicle, a vehicle of the future. What does that look like? So the idea, based on sort of the grounding that he had in our wanting to contribute to society, his mindset immediately went to, well, it has to be something that's not so dependent on fossil fuels. It has to be something that actually helps us make sure that we are doing something better for the environment than today. And then eventually the team came up with this concept of the hybrid synergy drive technology. And there was absolutely no logical business reason at the time when we launched the Prius for us to actually do it. Gas prices were at an all-time low. We couldn't make money on it at the beginning. And the idea was that it was actually just the right thing to do, but at the same time, we knew that we could eventually make it into a sustainable business. It could be a product that had returns. So we did it anyway. We were heavily scrutinized. Some people in the industry sort of laughed at us, saying, what strange timing, Toyota, that come out with something like this. But it's paid off. Over 8 million on the road today, and it's like the equivalent of buying 58 billion gallons less of fuel as a result of those cars worldwide, as well as millions of pounds of CO2 being taken out of the environment as well. Sure. The Mirai, which is our hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, which is the latest, is another kind of iconic product example. The only emissions coming from the Mirai is water vapor. And hydrogen is so prevalent in society, you can actually generate hydrogen actually without electricity. You can actually do it from waste. And so the idea that if you could not use the grid to generate what's required, to move the vehicle, and then actually not have emissions, it's utopia.
Pretty powerful.
So those are product examples that are ones that people are most aware of. And I will mention just one example that's something that we just recently made public. And there's a product that is in beta testing right now called the Blade. And Blade, B-L-A-I-D, it's kind of short for blind aid. And it's a wearable device. And it's taking technology that we would use because of our vehicle-to-infrastructure technology with our cars, or vehicle-to-vehicle communications technology, but applying it in ways that actually help people who are blind or visually impaired become more mobile. And terrific. So the idea is that we're beta testing. We'll have 1,000 in the market later on this year in the blind community for them to try and give us additional feedback. And we plan over the next couple of years to take that into production. And that in and of itself will be a revenue stream for the company. And it's really all about our quest to think about mobility different than just driving a car. It's about improving the way individuals can move around and helping improve their quality of life by making sure that things that they can't do, like using a cane or a guide dog, closing that gap, sensing where restrooms are, sensing if they come into a room like this and there are empty seats. And blind people, the guide dogs typically are not trained to be able to take them to empty seats. But this blade device can help them navigate to where there's an empty chair.
That's fascinating, and I think it gives a little sense of the power and possibility of the Toyota Mobility Foundation. Can you say a little bit more about the vision for the foundation?
So the foundation is, it was launched just a couple of years ago, and it was really the kind of brainchild of our CEO, Akio Toyoda. And he really wanted to, he didn't want a traditional foundation. He wanted a foundation that was more connected to the business, but that could allow us to have that social lens on the kinds of projects that we pursued that might give us intelligence, give us learnings from the marketplace that would actually help us improve our business, either improve, like either reduce costs, improve insights to actually make us better as a company for our customers. And so we just embarked on this journey from starting from scratch and said, okay, well, how do you do that with the foundation? So we've spent the last couple of years developing strategies, doing pilot demonstration projects in various markets around the world to get a better grasp of the mobility challenges that exist in the world, developing and developed markets, and what are the kinds of ways that we can partner with third parties to really be able to come up with solutions for the mobility challenges they have in market. And with the hopes that those solutions can actually turn into viable businesses. Sometimes it could be for us, and sometimes it might be for someone else.
Yeah.
And it almost doesn't matter. What matters is it can lead to sustainable value that's actually generated.
That's terrific, and it's certainly a somewhat different vision for a foundation. Now, you have quite a job description. In addition to the foundation, diversity and inclusion, shared impact, environmental sustainability, those seem like three sort of separate topics. How do they come together in your role?
Yes. They've always been managed very separately.
Yes.
And when we started thinking about redesigning our organization, because now we're coming together in North America, we're coming together as kind of one Toyota. We're combining a lot of corporate different entities into one location. And so it's an opportunity to redesign and re-look at the organization structure. And so these three functions that I've had the opportunity to engage in at different times in my career, it occurred to me in talking to others that, if they were really combined, there could be so much more synergy there. So all the examples that I've heard today from folks here and the other speakers, there are things about people who are disenfranchised. And what we understand by statistics is that people who are disenfranchised in society, people who don't have access to mobility, for example, tend to be people who are people of color. Sure. It impacts women in a more severe way than men, some of the negative aspects of lack of access. It impacts people who are on the lower socioeconomic scale than others. All of those things are issues that our diversity and inclusion practice cared about. And so why should we be managing diversity and inclusion as a separate entity than some of the shared impact work? They really work together. And as a matter of fact, I've gotten to the point now where it's very difficult for me to separate the two
That's
ideas.
very interesting.
And from a sustainability standpoint, it's the same notion of we've accumulated so much know-how to share.
Yep.
Why can't we take that same know-how, look at those same disenfranchised communities and people, and then figure out how we can apply that technology in new ways to actually add value back into society? We feel like by 2050, we have this big aspirational goal that we want to be a net positive company, not just a net zero company.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Angela Glover-Blackwell spoke earlier very powerfully about equity. And certainly what you're describing about how these different issues come together really is an example of the powerful role companies can play in addressing issues of equity and opportunity. So it's great to hear. Well, we have some terrific questions from the audience, including some really challenging ones. And in the spirit of the summit, I'm going to go for one of the challenging ones, which is to say Toyota was viewed as a real leader with the Prius, but seems to have fallen behind with Tesla and others taking over this next generation of alternative energy vehicles. You mentioned the hydrogen vehicle. but there's a whole infrastructure that needs to be in place to make that possible.
Yes.
What is Toyota's vision now?
So, so actually, we don't think we've fallen behind. What we feel is that we are really invested in the hydrogen technology as sort of the next big thing, for all the attributes I mentioned earlier. And you're right, the infrastructure is the big challenge. So one of the things we're working on is we've already done things like we've opened up our technology and patents so that other people can actually more easily or quickly adapt the hydrogen technology in different ways and for different applications. Because we want to do everything we can to accelerate, the adoption of hydrogen as a fuel, and then also partnering with organizations who are going to be helping to accelerate building up the infrastructure. So, I think the way we see it is Toyota by itself is not going to, transform the infrastructure. We actually can't do it without partnering with others who have the resources and networks to be able to make that happen. So our real intent is to try to get more saturation into the market with that kind of technology. So not just about vehicles again, but also there are so many other ways that you can use that kind of technology. Energy management, where your vehicle can actually power your home in a natural disaster.
Wow.
Or things like that we already know can work. And so we're really looking beyond just how do we use it for vehicles, but how do we take this technology and use it for a broader good? And so I think that's what you're going to see a lot more of from Toyota.
That's terrific, and it both creates an expansive view of the future for the company. It also begins to kind of redefine competition, as there is a need for more collaboration, coordination among different companies to really create this kind of change in society. Another great question, and we have lots of internal champions for shared value here who are working very hard in their own companies to try and bring about shared value thinking, shared value initiatives, a strategy that embraces shared value. What were the challenges that you ran into as you've tried to bring this thinking into Toyota?
Well, we still have challenges because we consider ourselves to really be infants in this whole shared value journey in its modern day sense. And I can tell you probably with our organization, the biggest challenge we have right now is the fact that we've become a very highly respected and successful company by using very strong functional silos to get things done. So engineers work with engineers and they do engineering stuff. And then the purchasing people do the stuff and then they talk to someone just because they want to make sure that they negotiate the best price. People like, within my team, I have a lot of people who are traditional philanthropists, right? Who wanted to do good and wanted to give back. And when you start looking at shared value and it becoming embedded more and more into your culture, you can't work in those silos anymore. It requires my team to reach way across the silos and figure out how to bring people together. Because we're not engineers. We don't have the engineering expertise to actually come up with new revenue streams that are having this impact in society. We have to use those engineers and their know-how. We have to use manufacturing people. We have to use everyone in the Toyota family to be able to make this happen. And I would say that our biggest challenge is really breaking through those sort of divisional barriers to the point where we can really optimize how we work together and how we can generate new ideas.
So that's the challenge. What have you found as solutions? Or what advice would you give others who face these kinds of silos? How do you make a difference
Well,
there?
what I found is that, we started down this path of, when I was asked to sort of take on this challenge, they said, please lead CSR. And we started talking internally about CSR. I'm like, this is not CSR. We saw this as not a responsibility, but an opportunity. So we reframed it into social innovation. And as soon as we started reframing it and talking about it with other stakeholders across the company, what we found is there are so many hand raisers who say, I want to help. I actually want to contribute somehow. I only have this much to bring to the table, but please utilize me. So I would say that I have almost as many people who are working towards some sort of social innovation work as I do who actually report to me within the organization. And so my real advice is that people are probably closer to getting there than they think, But if you're going to wait for the big mandate from the top to make it happen, or just to get started, that might not come. Or if you're going to wait for, some big policy change that's going to happen, and you could probably make some grassroots efforts to actually get some proof points that can be taken back to top management to say, oh, here's an example of a win that we've had if we could only pursue this further. And that's really been our experience.
That's terrific. And I think this idea of pilot projects, of wins, of proving that it's possible is tremendously important, because we often see that, as much as we talk about the theory and the idea and get Michael Porter up there to talk about shared value, people are skeptical. Yeah. They're skeptical that it will work in our industry, in our company, et cetera. And until they actually see something happen on the ground, it's very, very hard to make it happen. Well, I see that we are out of time, but thank you, Latondra, for such a terrific conversation and for the work you do. Thank you. Thank you very much.